What really makes a good job? Hey, I am Chuck the Bureaucrat, and a little while ago I posted a video asking people what they thought the best rank was. And you know me, I'm a systems guy, inputs, outputs, how does the system work, and more importantly, how do I make the system generate what I want from it? And I tend to view ranks kind of like cogs in the system. I know, probably a short-sighted view, because there wasn't a lot of consensus about what rank was the best. Instead, consensus seemed to form around what conditions made for the best job. And as we'll discuss, I think it might be possible that knowing these conditions that make a good military job would make it possible to inject those conditions into just about any place and make, well, any job a good job. Actually, I do have to take back that comment about there being no consensus on which is the best military rank. There was sort of a consensus that warrant officers have, well, that they have the best jobs. And one of the things that was really interesting about that was, you know how sometimes people will see a job and they think it's a good job until they get into it, and then they discover that there's some really crappy aspects to it that don't make it a good job? Well, NCOs, enlisted officers, they all seemed to look at the warrant officer and think that the warrant officer had a good job. And the warrant officers agreed. So number one, go warrant. And if you can't, well, here are some features to look for in your military jobs. One of the most common features that people commented on was a reasonable span of responsibility. That is, responsibility for some people, but not responsibility for so many people that it becomes unmanageable. A squad, a platoon, maybe a small company, but beyond that, the people problems start to become overwhelming. And then, closely tied to this are two additional ideas. One is just a healthy mix of leading and doing. Probably these two ideas mean different things to different people, but finding a healthy balance between I'm doing things that make a difference and I'm leading other people to make a difference, well, that seems important. And even if the job you have doesn't give you the right mix that you're looking for, that's probably an indication that you should seek out opportunities to add whatever is missing from your experience. The second concept, closely tied to that idea of an appropriate span of responsibility, was that a good job lets you feel the impact of the work you're doing. And I'm going to harp on that idea of feeling the impact. It's not enough to make an impact. You have to be able to feel it. Those of you mid-grade officers who end up at headquarters working on some project that's going to take years and years to complete, well, you're likely to be denied that feeling of impact. Aside from the option of just kind of cooking up some sort of personal project to make you feel like you're doing something, you might want to go out and visit the units or the bases that are impacted by whatever project you're on so you can get a better sense of the impact you're having. Another broad theme that a lot of folks pointed out when it came to military jobs was the idea of competence. Military jobs can put you in some really strange situations where you don't exactly know what's going on. Yeah, we're going to make you the subject matter expert on low Earth orbit satellites. The fuck is a low Earth orbit satellite? And, of course, not knowing what's going on, well, it's not going to make things very much fun. But for some of you, your whole military career is going to be defined by getting jerked around from one job to another, one incompetence to another. If you can hammer out some particular field where you get to be an expert, well, that's pretty good. But if you can't, you're going to have to think of this in sort of a meta way. That's one of the reasons that I got so good at navigating, law, policy, and regulation. You can drag me from the military working dog program to driver safety to missile procurement, and I am always going to come back to that touchstone of law, policy, and regulation. Now, part of the reason that you guys suggested that competence is important is because it's the gateway to actual authority. Not command authority, but the kind of authority that gets listened to by leadership. A job where you have some level of authority, well, that is going to naturally beat a job where you don't. Of course, if you're newly assigned to an organization, it might take time to develop that kind of authority. A less obvious insight that ties to this is what one of you put as the difference between a fire and an emergency. The more experienced, competent, and authoritative you are, the easier it is to stand outside of some screaming frenzy and approach it with the professionalism that it requires. And, while I wouldn't say it this way, certainly a number of you did, it is easier to sham when you know what you're doing and your boss knows that you know what you're doing, but he doesn't exactly understand what you're doing. The way I'd say it is that if you can deliver results to your boss when it matters, well, he's a lot less concerned about how you spend your time when there isn't a crisis. Now, before I wrap up, you guys had 2 other points that I thought were really good. Number 1 was a variation on that idea that shit rolls downhill. And it was the observation that shit doesn't spend much time in the middle. If you want to find a good military job, well, part of that involves making sure that you're not at the exact bottom of some toilet drain. And number 2 was the presence of peers. I'd like to say that this has something to do with having a band of brothers and a shared experience and someone to talk to who understands, but I'm a little bit suspicious that it has a lot more to do with the fact that it's hard to stand out in a crowd of one. You can easily demonstrate that you are a better than average finance clerk in a finance unit, but if you're the only finance guy in an infantry unit, how would they even know if you're actually doing a good job? But so what? Well, number 1, it should be pretty obvious why warrant officers have such good jobs. Their span of responsibility, their mix of leading and doing, their feeling of impact. Their jobs are designed to focus on competence and the resulting technical authority. They're safely in the middle, and so on. But if you're not, or you can't be a warrant officer, well, then what? Well, do not expect that the job in and of itself is going to provide the ideal mix of all these attributes. You are likely going to have to take steps to introduce any of the missing components. In fact, you're probably going to have to detect what's missing and then take action. And let me say this, do not expect your rater or senior rater to give it shit. Don't bother whining to your supervisor that you don't feel the impact of your work, because, trust me, they don't. In fact, if there was one key takeaway from all the comments that all of you provided, it would be this. Focus on developing the ability to deal with a crisis the way a fireman deals with a burning house, and not the way that a homeowner deals with his house catching on fire. And if you want to see more about what that means, watch this video.